The shattered glass and sudden silence of the San Domenico Palace honeymoon suite were Eliza's only warning before the first body hit the marble floor. Against the white silk, the pooling crimson looked terrifyingly like spilled Cabernet. Just 3 days ago, standing at the altar in Manhattan, Gabriel Costa had slid a 3-carat Harry Winston diamond onto her finger and whispered, "This marriage is just business." She had agreed to play the pawn to save her family's crumbling empire. But as bullets shredded their so-called business arrangement, she realized a terrifying truth. The contract didn't just buy her loyalty, it put a price tag on her life. The air inside the private dining room of the Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel smelled of old money, leather, and expensive cigar smoke. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of New York afternoon where the rain turned the city streets to slick, unforgiving black glass. Eliza sat frozen in a tufted armchair, her hands tightly clasped in her lap to hide their trembling. Across the heavy mahogany table sat the man who held her family's fate in his perfectly manicured hands, Gabriel Costa. He wasn't the bruised, knuckle-dragging thug the movies would have you believe a Mafia underboss should be. Gabriel was devastatingly polished, a 32-year-old phantom of the financial district who used shell companies and hedge funds to launder the blood money of the Costa syndicate. He wore a navy blue Brioni suit that cost more than most people made in a year, and his dark eyes held the chilling, vacant depth of a frozen lake. To his left sat his consigliere, an older man named Silas Hale. Next to Eliza sat her father, Alfred Bianchi, a once proud titan of New York commercial real estate, who was currently sweating through his Brooks Brothers shirt. "The debt is $42 million, Alfred," Gabriel said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone entirely devoid of emotion. He didn't raise his voice. Men with absolute power rarely need to. The market crash didn't bankrupt you. Your gambling habit and your disastrous investments in the Hudson Yards expansion did. You borrowed from my father. My father is not a bank. He does not offer grace periods. "Gabriel, please," her father choked out, his voice cracking. The man who had raised her, the man who used to carry her on his shoulders through Central Park, looked small, withered, and entirely broken. The union strikes delayed the build. "Give me 6 months. I can liquidate the properties in Queens." "The properties in Queens are leveraged to the hilt," Silas Hale interrupted smoothly, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "You have nothing left, Alfred." Except her. The room went dead silent. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner suddenly sounded like a bomb counting down. Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. "Me?" Eliza whispered, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. "What do you mean, accept her?" Gabriel finally looked at her. His gaze traced the lines of her face, analytical and detached, like a jeweler inspecting a diamond for flaws. "The Costa family is currently undergoing a restructuring," he explained, picking up a crystal tumbler of Macallan 25. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation is circling my father. We are shifting our operations entirely into legitimate real estate and logistics. To do that smoothly, the commission requires stability. They require the appearance of tradition." He took a slow sip of the amber liquid. "I need a wife, Eliza, a wife from a respected, albeit currently impoverished, family with clean records and good societal standing. Your pedigree is impeccable. Your father's debts are catastrophic. The solution is remarkably simple." "You want to buy me," Eliza said, the shock morphing into a sharp, icy anger. "I want to merge our interests," Gabriel corrected, setting the glass down. "We marry. The marriage lasts 5 years. During that time, you will be by my side at galas, charity events, and family gatherings. You will play the role of the devoted, happy wife. You will not ask questions about my business. You will not embarrass me. In exchange, your father's $42 million debt is erased immediately. He will be given a small stipend to retire quietly in Boca Raton, and if I refuse, she asked, lifting her chin, trying desperately to project a bravery she didn't feel. Gabriel didn't blink. Then my associates will collect the debt in the traditional manner. Your father will be dead by Friday, and you will spend the rest of your life warning from people who view you as an unpaid invoice. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of absolute, undeniable fact. Eliza looked at her father. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring at his hands, a silent, pathetic apology radiating from his hunched shoulders. He had traded her for his life. Fine, Eliza said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Silas slid a heavy, legal-sized document toward her, along with a Mont Blanc fountain pen. The prenup. It was a phone book-sized stack of stipulations, NDAs, and behavioral clauses. Gabriel leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers, stripping away the boardroom veneer for just a fraction of a second to reveal the ruthless predator beneath. Understand this, Eliza. This marriage is just business. You get my name, my protection, and my money. I get a shield. Do not expect romance. Do not expect affection. We are business partners playing a role. 3 weeks later, the role began. The wedding at St. Patrick's Cathedral was a grotesque masterpiece of hypocrisy. Over 500 guests filled the pews, politicians, real estate tycoons, and heavily scarred men wearing bespoke suits who sat exclusively in the back rows. Her dress, a custom Oscar de la Renta creation of Alençon lace and silk tulle, felt like a beautifully tailored straitjacket. When Gabriel lifted her veil, his face was an impenetrable mask. He slid the heavy Harry Winston diamond onto her finger, the platinum band cold against her skin. When the priest told him to kiss the bride, Gabriel leaned in. Eliza stiffened, expecting a brutal claiming. Instead, his lips barely brushed the corner of her mouth, a sterile, calculated contact designed purely for the flashing cameras of the society photographers behind them. "Smile, Eliza," he murmured against her cheek, his breath warm but his tone freezing. "The whole city is watching our merger." The charade didn't drop until they were at 40,000 feet. They left the reception at the Pierre Hotel in a convoy of black Cadillac Escalades speeding toward Teterboro Airport. By midnight, they were boarding Gabriel's private Bombardier Global 7500. The interior was a study in modern luxury, cream-colored leather seats, dark walnut paneling, and a fully stocked wet bar. As soon as the heavy cabin door sealed shut and the plane began its taxi, the suffocating tension that had wrapped around them all day finally snapped. Eliza collapsed into one of the plush captain's chairs, kicking off her white satin Manolo Blahniks. Her feet were blistered and aching. She reached up and began furiously pulling the dozens of heavy bobby pins out of her elaborate updo, desperate for some semblance of relief. Gabriel stripped off his tuxedo jacket, tossing it carelessly over a nearby sofa, and loosened his bow tie. He walked to the bar and poured 2 fingers of bourbon. He didn't offer her any. "You performed adequately today," he said, staring out the window at the dark tarmac of New Jersey. "The mayor was particularly convinced by your little speech about how we met through mutual friends. I lied to the face of a public official to cover up a Mafia extortion plot," Eliza snapped, rubbing her temples. A headache had been building behind her eyes since the reception. "Don't patronize me, Gabriel. I did what I was bought to do." He turned slowly, the glass suspended halfway to his mouth. "Don't confuse the transaction, Eliza. You weren't bought, you were salvaged. You'd do well to remember the difference." "Where are we going?" she asked, changing the subject before her anger pushed her to say something reckless. The itinerary had been kept entirely hidden from her. "Your security team packed my bags. I don't even know what country we're flying to." "Sicily," he replied, taking a seat opposite her. "Specifically, Taormina. My family has roots there. The commission requires us to show our faces to the old guard. They need to see that the Costa family is honoring Italian traditions, even if we operate in America." "A mob-mandated honeymoon," Eliza muttered dryly. "How romantic. It is a required appearance," Gabriel corrected, his tone sharpening. We will be staying at the San Domenico Palace for 2 weeks. During the day, you could do whatever you please. Shop, swim, visit the Greek theater. But in the evenings, we have dinners scheduled with several high-ranking associates. You will wear the jewelry I provide. You will smile. You will act like a woman hopelessly in love. And when we are alone, she challenged, crossing her arms. Gabriel leaned back, his eyes dark and unreadable. When we are alone, we don't have to exist to each other. You have your suite, I have mine. The flight across the Atlantic was agonizingly long and silent. They operated in different orbits within the confined space of the jet. Gabriel spent the 9 hours reviewing encrypted documents on a secure tablet, occasionally making hushed phone calls on a satellite line. Eliza stared out the window into the black void, watching the sun slowly break over the horizon as they approached European airspace, illuminating the Mediterranean Sea in brilliant, mocking hues of sapphire and gold. They landed in Catania, under the blistering heat of the midday Sicilian sun. A detail of heavily armed silent men in linen suits met them on the tarmac. They ushered them into a bulletproof Mercedes S-Class for the drive up the winding coastal roads to Taormina. The San Domenico Palace was breathtaking. A former 14th century convent perched on a rocky promontory, it overlooked the Ionian Sea, with the imposing, smoking peak of Mount Etna looming in the distance. The air smelled of citrus, jasmine, and ancient stone. If the circumstances were different, if she had chosen the man walking beside her, it would have been paradise. Instead, it was just a gilded cage with a prettier view. Their suite was massive, a sprawling expanse of antique furniture, frescoes, and a private terrace that seemed to hover over the ocean. True to his word, Gabriel immediately directed the bellhops to put her luggage in the master bedroom, while he claimed the adjoining guest suite. For the first 36 hours, the arrangement worked exactly as he had outlined. They were ghosts to each other during the day. Eliza spent her time wandering the terrace gardens, trying to lose herself in the beauty of the bougainvillea and the distant sound of crashing waves. She drank espresso in the cloisters and tried not to think about her father back in New York or the 5 years of indentured servitude stretching out before her. At night, the masks went on. Their first dinner was with Don Carmine, a terrifyingly ancient man whose hand shook, yet who commanded absolute silence from his 50-man entourage. Gabriel transformed. He placed a possessive hand on the small of her back. He kissed her temple. He laughed at her forced, polite jokes. He was the picture of a fiercely protective, newly minted husband. It was a terrifyingly flawless performance, reminding her just how good of a liar Gabriel Costa truly was. But the facade was exhausting, and the strain of pretending was beginning to crack her composure. Little did she know, psychological warfare of their fake marriage was about to become the least of her problems. The real war was already at their doorstep. The nightmare began on their 3rd night in Sicily. Gabriel had arranged a private dinner for just the two of them on their suite's expansive terrace. It was ostensibly to celebrate her birthday, though Eliza knew it was merely a scheduled photo op. Earlier that afternoon, a pair of paparazzi had been spotted on a rented yacht anchored just offshore, aiming telephoto lenses at their balcony. The Costa family PR machine needed photos of the happy couple dining under the stars. The hotel staff had set up a wrought iron table adorned with white linen, heavy silver candelabras, and a sprawling centerpiece of red roses. A chilled bottle of Dom Perignon sat sweating in a silver bucket. Eliza wore a backless, emerald-green silk slip dress that Gabriel had sent to her room an hour earlier, paired with a diamond tennis bracelet that felt as heavy as handcuffs. Gabriel wore a tailored black shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, looking deceptively relaxed. The evening was suffocatingly warm. The sea breeze did little to cool the heavy, humid air. For the first hour, they maintained their silent, tense dynamic. They ate their sea bass and wild mushroom risotto in near silence, The only sounds the clinking of their silverware and the faint, rhythmic crashing of the waves far below. "You haven't touched your wine," Gabriel noted, his dark eyes flickering to her full glass. "I'm not in the mood to celebrate," Eliza replied, slicing a piece of fish with far more force than necessary. "The cameras are out there, Eliza. Pick up the glass. Smile." His voice was a low, commanding whip. Eliza bristled, her temper finally flaring. "You don't get to control every muscle in my body, Gabriel. You bought my presence at the table. You didn't buy my joy." For a fraction of a second, Eliza thought she saw a flash of genuine annoyance cross his perfectly sculpted features. He leaned across the table, his hand reaching out to wrap around her wrist. His grip was firm, electric, but surprisingly not painful. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I am not your enemy. I gave your father a way out when the rest of the commission wanted to leave him in the foundation of a parking garage. You are alive. He is alive. You are dripping in diamonds in one of the most beautiful places on earth. I suggest you learn how to act like it." Eliza glared back at him, refusing to let him intimidate her. "A beautiful cage is still a cage, Gabriel, and you're still the warden." He opened his mouth to reply, his eyes narrowing, but he never got the words out. A sharp, deafening crack echoed through the night air, echoing off the ancient stone walls of the convent. It didn't sound like a gunshot at first. It sounded like a massive, thick branch snapping in half. But a millisecond later, the heavy silver candelabra between them exploded into a shower of twisted metal and flying wax. Time seemed to fracture, slowing down into agonizing, distinct frames. Eliza saw the red wine glass in front of her shatter, sending a spray of dark liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. She saw a chunk of stone from the balcony railing disintegrate into dust. And she saw the expression on Gabriel's face shift from cold annoyance to sheer, unadulterated violence. "Down!" Gabriel roared. He didn't wait for her brain to process the command. He lunged across the table, his massive weight slamming into her. Her chair tipped backward, and they crashed onto the hard terracotta tiles of the terrace just as a second volley of gunshots tore through the air. Thwack! Thwack! Thwack. Bullets tore through the plaster walls of the suite behind them, raining white dust and debris over her bare shoulders. The deafening roar of automatic weapons fire suddenly ripped through the quiet Sicilian night, completely drowning out the sound of the ocean. "Gabriel!" Eliza screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror clawing its way out of her throat. Her ears were ringing violently. She was pinned beneath him, the heavy, solid mass of his body acting as a human shield over hers. "Stay perfectly still," he hissed in her ear. He wasn't panicked. He was terrifyingly calm, his breathing slow and measured, as if he had been expecting this exact scenario his entire life. He reached behind his back, slipping beneath the tailored fabric of his slacks, and pulled out a compact, matte black Sig Sauer 9mm. He had brought a gun to their romantic dinner. "Who is shooting at us?" Eliza sobbed, squeezing her eyes shut as another burst of gunfire shattered the massive French doors leading into their suite, raining jagged shards of glass over them. "Quiet," Gabriel commanded. He shifted his weight off her, rolling onto his stomach, using the thick stone balustrade of the terrace as cover. He peeked over the edge for a fraction of a second, his eyes scanning the darkness below. "They're not on the boats," he muttered more to himself than to her. "They're on the cliff face, sniper cover, with an assault team pushing through the main hotel." As if on cue, the heavy oak door of their suite, the only entrance from the interior hallway, shuddered violently. Someone was trying to kick it in. "We need to move, now," Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave. He grabbed her forearm, dragging her up to her feet. "Keep your head down and run to the bathroom. Do not stop. Do not look back." They scrambled over the shattered glass and ruined food, diving through the remains of the French doors into the darkened living room of the suite. The air was thick with smoke, plaster dust, and the sharp metallic tang of cordite. Bang! The heavy oak door splintered, the locking mechanism giving way. Two men dressed entirely in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by ski masks, spilled into the room, sweeping the area with submachine guns. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He pushed her hard toward the marble archway of the bathroom, stepping out of cover to draw their fire. He raised the Sig Sauer. Pop. Pop. Two suppressed incredibly precise shots. The first man crumpled instantly, his momentum carrying him forward into a heavy antique credenza. The second man swung his weapon toward Gabriel, the muzzle flashing violently in the dark room. Gabriel dove behind a velvet sofa, bullets shredding the upholstery where he had been standing a second before. Eliza hit the cold marble floor of the bathroom, scrambling backward until her spine hit the bathtub. She wrapped her arms around her knees, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't a business deal. Men were dying 15 feet away from her. Another single shot rang out from the living room, followed by a heavy, sickening thud. Then silence. A shadow filled the doorway. Eliza opened her mouth to scream, but Gabriel stepped into the dim light. He had a streak of blood across his cheek, a graze from a flying piece of debris, not a bullet wound, and his dark eyes were burning with a lethal, terrifying intensity. He looked like the devil incarnate. "Get up," he ordered, striding toward her and hauling her to her feet. "There will be more. We have roughly 90 seconds before their backup breaches the stairwell." "Where are your men?" Eliza choked out, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, cutting tracks through the plaster dust on her face. "Your security detail? The men who drove us here?" Gabriel's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering furiously in his cheek. He ejected the SPET magazine from his pistol, slamming a fresh one into the grip with a sharp, metallic click. "My men were stationed at the front gate and the lobby," Gabriel said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "The only way heavily armed hitmen bypassed my outer perimeter and reached our suite is if someone gave them our exact location and security rotations." He grabbed her hand, his grit bruising as he dragged her toward the private service elevator hidden in the back of the walk-in closet. "What are you saying?" Eliza gasped, struggling to keep up with his rapid strides. Gabriel punched the button for the underground garage. He turned to her, his eyes dead and hollow, stripping away every ounce of the civilized businessman he pretended to be. "I'm saying," Gabriel said coldly, "that the only people who knew the intricate details of our honeymoon itinerary were the 5 sitting members of the Costa Commission back in New York. We weren't sent to Sicily to show our faces to the old guard." Eliza. The elevator doors opened, and he pushed her inside. "We were sent here to die." The descent in the service elevator felt like plummeting into a grave. The brushed steel walls reflected the horrifying tableau they made, a Mafia prince with blood smeared across his cheek and a trembling bride in a ruined emerald slip dress covered in plaster dust. "If the doors open and they are waiting," Gabriel said, his voice flat, his grip on the Sig Sauer tightening until his knuckles turned white, "you drop to the floor. You do not scream. You do not run into my line of fire. Do you understand?" Eliza couldn't speak. She simply nodded, her throat tight with a terror so profound it tasted metallic. The digital display blinked B2. The subterranean parking garage. With a soft, melodic chime that felt grotesquely out of place, the elevator doors slid open. They didn't step out immediately. Gabriel held his arm across her chest, pinning her to the back wall as he peered around the steel frame. The garage was a cavernous expanse of concrete and shadow, illuminated only by flickering fluorescent tubes. It smelled of motor oil, damp earth, and exhaust. At first glance, it appeared empty. Rows of luxury vehicles, Maseratis, Ferraris, and heavily armored SUVs sat silently in the gloom. "Move," he whispered. They slicked out of the elevator, moving quickly between the rows of cars. Gabriel's posture was predatory, his eyes darting toward every pillar and alcove. They were heading toward a sleek, charcoal-gray Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio parked near the rear exit. They were 20 yards away when the quiet was shattered. "Drop the weapon, Costa," a voice barked in heavily accented English from the shadows near the exit ramp. Two men stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. They weren't wearing the tactical gear of the assault team upstairs. They wore dark suits, the universal uniform of syndicate muscle. One held a sawed-off Benelli shotgun leveled directly at Gabriel's chest. The other aimed a suppressed Glock. Gabriel didn't drop his weapon. He didn't even slow his pace. "Get behind the Mercedes," he ordered her, his voice eerily calm. "I said drop it," the man with the shotgun roared, racking the slide. Gabriel's response was a masterclass in lethal efficiency. He didn't try to reason or negotiate. He simply raised his arm and fired twice in a fraction of a second. The man with the Glock took a round to the throat and collapsed instantly. But the man with the shotgun pulled the trigger as he fell backward from Gabriel's second shot. The deafening roar of the 12 gauge echoed through the concrete cavern. A spray of buckshot shredded the side mirror of the Mercedes Eliza was diving behind. Eliza hit the oily concrete, covering her head as glass rained down on her. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Gabriel grunt a sharp, guttural sound of pain. Eliza scrambled to her knees, peering around the bumper. Both men were down, unmoving. Gabriel was leaning heavily against the trunk of the Alfa Romeo, his left hand clutching his right bicep. Dark, viscous blood was already seeping through the fingers of his black shirt. "Gabriel," Eliza gasped, rushing toward him, her bare feet slipping on the slick floor. "Keys," he hissed through gritted teeth, tossing her a black key fob from his pocket with his good hand. "Driver's seat. Now. I can't drive this." Eliza panicked, looking at the aggressive stance of the Italian sports car. "I don't know the roads. You learn right now, Eliza, or we both die in this basement," he snarled, his eyes flashing with a ferocious intensity that brooked no argument. He pushed himself off the car and stumbled toward the passenger side. Eliza scrambled into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of expensive leather and new electronics. She slammed her foot on the brake and hit the ignition. The engine roared to life with a vicious, throaty growl. Gabriel collapsed into the passenger seat, slamming his door shut. He tossed a burner phone he had just scavenged from one of the dead men onto the center console. "Go, break the barrier," he commanded, pointing toward the wooden security arm at the exit ramp. She shifted the car into drive and slammed her bare foot onto the accelerator. The Alfa Romeo lunged forward, tires shrieking against the concrete. They hit the wooden barrier at 40 miles per hour, splintering it into kindling as they burst out of the garage and into the humid Sicilian night. "Take the Via Luigi Pirandello," Gabriel instructed, his breathing becoming shallow as he pressed a linen handkerchief hard against his bleeding arm. "Head north, toward Castelmola. Keep the headlights off until we hit the main switchbacks." Eliza gripped the leather steering wheel, her knuckles bone white. The winding coastal road was treacherous, a ribbon of asphalt clinging to the edge of the cliffs. Below them, the Mediterranean Sea was a black abyss. Without headlights, she was driving by the pale light of the moon and sheer adrenaline. "You're bleeding badly," Eliza said, glancing at him. The dark stain was spreading rapidly down his sleeve, dripping onto the pristine leather seats. "It's a through and through. Missed the artery," he rasped, his head falling back against the headrest. "Just keep your eyes on the road. They will have spotters on the highway. We can't use the autostrada." "Where are we going?" Eliza demanded, whipping the steering wheel to the left to navigate a hairpin turn. The tires squealed in protest. "Safe house," he breathed out, closing his eyes. "Old vineyard near Lingua Glossa, owned by a man loyal to my grandfather. Not on any syndicate registry." The drive was an agonizing blur of sharp turns, near misses, and the suffocating smell of copper in the enclosed cabin. She pushed the car to its limits, terrified that headlights would suddenly appear in their rearview mirror. For an hour, the only sounds were the roaring engine and Gabriel's increasingly ragged breathing. He was losing too much blood. The invincible, untouchable Gabriel Costa was currently fading away in the passenger seat of a stolen car, his life entirely in the hands of the woman he had blackmailed into marriage. The irony was bitter, but she didn't have time to savor it. "Gabriel," Eliza said sharply as his head lolled to the side. "Stay awake. I'm awake," he murmured, though his voice lacked its usual commanding edge. "Turn right at the next dirt road." Between the olive groves, she hit the brakes, throwing the car into a sharp turn down an unpaved, rutted path. Dust billowed around them, coating the sleek exterior of the car. They bounced over the uneven terrain for another 3 miles, climbing higher into the foothills of Mount Etna. The air grew cooler, thinner, carrying the faint scent of sulfur from the distant volcano. Finally, the headlights caught the crumbling stone walls of an ancient, abandoned farmhouse surrounded by overgrown grapevines. "Here," Gabriel whispered. "Pull around to the back." Eliza hid the car behind a dilapidated barn, killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. She sat there for a moment, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't unbuckle her seatbelt. She had just driven a getaway car. She had just watched men die. "Eliza," Gabriel said softly. Eliza turned to him. His face was ashen, slick with cold sweat. "I need your help," he said, the words clearly tasting like poison to him. "I can't walk." The interior of the farmhouse was pitch black, smelling of dust, dried herbs, and deep isolation. They stumbled through the heavy wooden door, Gabriel leaning almost his entire weight against her. Eliza gritted her teeth, ignoring the burning ache in her shoulders as she guided him toward a long, rustic wooden table in the center of what used to be a kitchen. "Flashlight in the drawer by the sink," he muttered, collapsing onto one of the wooden chairs with a heavy groan. She found the heavy mag light and switched it on, placing it on the table so the beam hit the ceiling, casting a dim, ambient glow over the room. She ran back out to the Alfa Romeo, retrieving the fully stocked trauma kit Gabriel had insisted was always kept in the trunk. When she returned, Gabriel had managed to peel off his ruined shirt. The sight made her stomach heave. The buckshot had torn a jagged, messy hole through the flesh of his upper arm. It wasn't bleeding in spurts, which meant the artery was indeed intact, but the wound was deep, ugly, and still oozing sluggishly. "I'm not a doctor," Eliza warned him, her hands trembling as she unzipped the red canvas bag. She pulled out sterile gloves, gauze, a bottle of betadine, and a curved suture needle. "You don't need to be," Gabriel said, his eyes locking onto hers. Even pale and bleeding, his gaze was piercing. "Clean it, pack it, wrap it tight. I've had worse. I'm not doing this because I care about you," Eliza said, her voice shaking as she poured the dark brown iodine solution directly into the open wound. Gabriel let out a sharp hiss, his jaw clenching so hard she thought his teeth might shatter, but he didn't pull away. "I'm doing this because you are my only ticket out of this God-forsaken country." "Noted," he grunted, a morbid, humorless smile touching the corner of his pale lips. "Your bedside manner is impeccable, Mrs. Costa." Eliza ignored the jab, focusing entirely on the gruesome task. She packed the wound with sterile gauze, binding it tightly with thick layers of bandages. For 20 minutes, the only sounds in the farmhouse were her ragged breathing and the tearing of medical tape. The proximity was suffocating. She could feel the heat radiating from his bare skin, see the intricate map of old, faded scars crisscrossing his ribs and shoulder, silent testaments to a violent life she knew nothing about. When she finished, she stepped back, her hands covered in his blood. She felt sick. Gabriel leaned back in the chair, his chest heaving as the adrenaline crashed. He reached out with his good hand and picked up the burner phone he had taken from the hitman in the garage. "Give me the light," he ordered. Eliza angled the flashlight toward his hands. He punched a sequence into the phone, his fingers flying across the keypad despite his weakened state. He was bypassing the lock screen, running a decryption app she didn't understand. "Who sent them?" Eliza asked, wiping her bloody hands on a relatively clean rag she found on the counter. "You said it was the commission. You said they set us up." Gabriel stared at the small screen, the blue light reflecting in his dark, hollow eyes. The silence stretched on for so long she thought he was going to pass out. "Not the entire commission," he finally said, his voice terrifyingly soft. It wasn't the voice of a man in pain. It was the voice of a man calculating murder. A coup, orchestrated from the inside. He turned the phone toward her. On the screen was an encrypted messaging thread. The messages were brief, clinical, and sent just hours before the attack. "Target is on the terrace. Details confirm. No security on the west wall. Payment routed to the Caymans. Make it clean. Silas," Gabriel said, spitting the name out like venom. "Silas Hale?" Eliza asked, stunned. "Your consigliere? The man who sat next to you when you bought me? He has always believed my father was too old, too soft, and that I was too focused on legitimate business," Gabriel explained, his eyes darkening with a lethal fury. "He wants the syndicate. He used this wedding, this entire restructure, as a distraction. Was my father facing federal indictment? Killing me here in Sicily leaves a power vacuum. Silas steps in to stabilize the family. But how did he know exactly where we were?" Eliza asked, her mind racing. "How did he know about the dinner on the terrace?" "You said only 5 people knew the itinerary." Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen, scrolling up to a previous message. His expression shifted, an unreadable shadow passing over his features. He looked at her, a strange, almost pitying look in his cold eyes. "Silas didn't have eyes on the ground until today," Gabriel said slowly, carefully. "He needed someone to confirm the daily specific movements, someone who was given a secondary itinerary for emergency contact purposes." A cold, heavy dread began to pool in her stomach. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. "No," Eliza whispered, taking a step back. "No, Gabriel." He turned the phone toward her again, tapped on a different message thread. This one wasn't an encrypted alias. It was an international number, a New York area code. "She is wearing the green dress. Dinner is at 8 p.m. local time. Do not miss." Eliza recognized the number instantly. She had dialed it 1,000 times in her life. It was her father's private cell phone. "Alfred Bianchi," Gabriel stated, his voice devoid of emotion, delivering the killing blow. "Your father didn't just sell you to me to clear his debt, Eliza. He sold you to Silas to clear his conscience." "You're lying," Eliza choked out, a sob tearing up her throat. She backed away until she hit the stone wall of the kitchen. "He wouldn't. He traded me to save his life. He wouldn't set me up to be murdered." "I'm his daughter. You were his liability," Gabriel corrected brutally, but there was a strange lack of malice in his tone. It was just the ugly, unvarnished truth. "Silas likely approached him after our meeting at the plaza, offered him a better deal. Total debt forgiveness, perhaps a cut of the union contracts, and a guarantee that he wouldn't spend his twilight years under my thumb. All he had to do," Gabriel continued, his eyes tracking her complete breakdown, "was ensure that both of us were on that terrace tonight. He knew Silas wasn't going to leave a witness. He knew you were collateral damage." Her legs gave out. She slid down the rough stone wall, hitting the dusty floor in a tangle of ruined green silk. The tears came then, hot, violent, and unstoppable. She wept for the illusion of her family. She wept for the father who had looked her in the eyes and handed her a death sentence, wrapped in a white wedding dress. Gabriel watched her cry from the shadows. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer empty platitudes. In the brutal world of the Costa Syndicate, betrayal was the only currency that never lost its value. "Cry for him tonight, Eliza," Gabriel said, his voice cutting through the dark like a blade. mourn the father you thought you had. Because tomorrow we fly back to New York, and when we land, we are going to burn his world and Silas's world to ashes." The morning sun crested over the jagged peak of Mount Etna, casting long, bruised shadows across the ruined farmhouse. Eliza hadn't slept a single second. She spent the entire night sitting on the floor beside the heavy wooden table, her knees pulled to her chest, listening to the agonizingly slow rhythm of Gabriel's breathing. The fever had spiked around 3 a.m., reducing the untouchable Mafia prince to a shivering, delirious mess. She had wiped his brow with damp rags, forced him to drink tepid water, and fought a terrifying silent battle against the reality that if he died, she was permanently trapped in a country where men with submachine guns were hunting her. But Gabriel Costa was not a man who surrendered to anything, not even a fever. By dawn, the intense heat radiating from his skin had broken. He opened his eyes, the dark irises sharp and lucid, locking onto her with the predatory awareness of a wolf waking in a trap. "You're still here," he rasped, his voice sounding like cracked gravel. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," Eliza replied flatly, her throat raw from crying. The tears had dried hours ago, leaving behind a cold, hollow void where her love for her father used to be. The betrayal had burned through her like acid, stripping away the naive, terrified girl who had walked down the aisle at St. Patrick's Cathedral. In its place was something brittle, sharp, and infinitely angrier. Gabriel pushed himself up, suppressing a groan as his injured arm shifted. He looked at her face, reading the tectonic shift in her demeanor. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered purpose. There was a sat phone taped beneath the floorboards in the corner of the room. He commanded quietly, "Bring it to me." Within 20 minutes, Gabriel had made 2 calls. The first was to a local Sicilian smuggler, a man whose loyalty belonged to Gabriel's grandfather, not the current commission. The second was to a shadow faction of his own enforcers in New York, men who operated completely off the books, entirely loyal to Gabriel and completely unknown to Silas Hale. "We leave in an hour," Gabriel said, tossing the heavy black phone onto the table. "Matteo is bringing a truck. He will take us to a private airstrip outside of Palermo. From there, a modified Gulfstream 65B, registered to a Belizean shell company, will fly us over the Atlantic below commercial radar tracking. We are going to ghost our way back into New York." "And when we land?" Eliza asked, standing up. The ruined emerald-soaked dress hung off her, stained with plaster and his blood. She felt like a ghost already. Gabriel's eyes darkened, the lethal, calculating underboss returning in full force. "Silas believes we are dead. By now, his men have searched the hotel, found the blood in the garage, and assumed I crawled off to die. Tonight, he will convene the remaining heads of the Costa family to declare himself the new Dawn. He will present your father as his new legitimate front for the Hudson Yards money laundering operation." He stepped closer to her, the sheer size of him blocking out the morning light streaming through the shattered window. He reached out with his uninjured hand, his thumb gently brushing a streak of dry dirt from her cheek. The touch was entirely unexpected, softer than anything she had ever felt from him. It sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "I told you this marriage was a business transaction, Eliza," he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate register. "But in my business, an attack on my wife is an attack on my empire. Silas crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed, and your father forfeited his right to breathe the moment he gave them your location." "I want to be there," Eliza said, the words slipping out of her mouth before she could analyze them. Gabriel paused, his hand dropping to his side. "It won't be a boardroom negotiation. It will be an execution. You don't want to see what I've become when I take back what is mine." "He was my father," Eliza countered, her voice hardening into steel. She stepped into Gabriel's space, looking up into his ruthless eyes. He looked me in the face, walked me down the aisle, and handed me a death sentence to save his own skin. I am not hiding in a safe house while you clean up the mess. I want to look him in the eye when his world ends. I want him to know that I survived. Gabriel studied her for a long, heavy moment. A slow, terrifying smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It was the proud, vicious smile of a devil recognizing a kindred spirit. "All right, Mrs. Costa," he whispered. "Let's go home and burn them to the ground." The Gulf Stream touched down on a desolate stretch of tarmac at the Westchester County Airport just after midnight. A freezing torrential rain was hammering New York, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of Sicily. They bypassed customs completely, stepping off the jet and directly into a waiting fleet of blacked-out Range Rovers. Dominic, Gabriel's most trusted lieutenant, was waiting. He was a massive, scarred man who handed Gabriel a tailored black Tom Ford suit and a fresh Kevlar vest in the back of the SUV. For Eliza, there was a sleek, black designer trench coat to cover the ruined, bloody remains of her honeymoon dress. "Silas is hosting the confirmation at the Baccarat Hotel," Dominic reported from the driver's seat, his eyes flickering to the rearview mirror as they sped down the Hutchinson River Parkway. "He rented the private penthouse residences on the top floor. He has 12 men downstairs, 6 in the elevator banks, and 4 on the door. Alfred Bianchi is already inside, drinking vintage champagne and celebrating his new union contracts." Gabriel buttoned his shirt over the heavy bandages on his arm, slipping a fresh Glock 19s into his shoulder holster. "Take out the lobby crew quietly. Cut the security feeds. We take the service elevators straight to the penthouse. No one gets out." The drive into Manhattan was a tense, silent blur. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated adrenaline. She was riding into a war zone with a man who was technically her captor, yet he was the only person in the world who had actually thrown himself in front of a bullet for her. They arrived at the Baccarat Hotel. The opulent, crystal-adorned lobby was eerily empty, a testament to the deadly efficiency of Dominic's shadow crew. They moved like a synchronized strike force. Gabriel's hand never left the small of her back, guiding her, shielding her, treating her not as a liability, but as a queen being escorted to her dark throne. They packed into the brushed steel service elevator, the digital numbers ticking upward like a countdown to hell. 50, 51, 52. Gabriel looked down at her. "Stay behind me. If the shooting starts, drop." "I know," Eliza said, her voice eerily calm. The doors chimed and slid open to the 53rd floor. 2 armed guards in cheap suits were standing in the hallway laughing. They barely had time to register the elevator opening before Dominic and another enforcer dropped them with suppressed fire. The heavy thuds of their bodies hitting the plush carpet were muffled by the roaring thunder outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Gabriel stepped over them, stalking toward the massive double doors of the penthouse suite. He didn't bother picking the lock. He didn't knock. He simply raised a heavy steel-toed boot and kicked the doors inward with a force that shattered the doorframe. The scene inside froze instantly. It was a picture of grotesque luxury. Silas Hale sat at the head of a massive glass dining table, a crystal snifter of Louis XIII cognac frozen halfway to his lips. Around him sat the remaining 3 capos of the Costa family. And there, sitting to Silas' right, looking flushed and victorious with a Cuban cigar between his fingers, was Alfred Bianchi, her father. The color instantly drained from Alfred's face. The cigar slipped from his fingers, burning a hole into the expensive Persian rug. "Gabriel," Silas choked out, his eyes widening in absolute terror. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost crawl out of its grave. "Hello, Silas," Gabriel said, his voice a low, terrifying purr that echoed off the Baccarat crystal chandeliers. He stepped fully into the room, drawing his weapon. Eliza stepped in right behind him, the heavy black trench coat sweeping around her ankles, her face pale and streaked with dirt, looking like an avenging angel dragging herself out of the wreckage. Eliza, her father whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the syllables. He scrambled backward, his chair tipping over with a loud crash. You're alive. No thanks to you, Eliza said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. The sound of her own voice surprised her. It held no tears, no weakness, only absolute contempt. Gabriel, listen to me, Silas stammered, raising his hands, his Patek Philippe watch catching the dim light. The other capos at the table didn't move a muscle. They were survivors. They saw the men pouring into the room behind them and instantly knew the coup had failed. This is a misunderstanding. We received intelligence that the Italians hit you. We were just stabilizing the territory. You bought the hit squad, Silas, Gabriel replied, raising the Glock and aiming it squarely at the older man's forehead. You wired the money to the Caymans, and you used my wife's father to track my location. You violated the oldest rule of the commission. You brought the violence into my home. Gabriel, please, we can negotiate, Silas shrieked. Bang. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, the deafening crack echoing through the penthouse. Silas Hale slumped forward onto the glass table, his blood instantly pooling around the crystal snifter of cognac. The remaining capos flinched but kept their hands flat on the table, silently pledging their renewed allegiance to the man holding the gun. Gabriel slowly turned the weapon, pointing it directly at Alfred Bianchi. Her father was on his knees, openly weeping, his hands clasped together in a pathetic display of cowardice. Eliza, please, he sobbed, ignoring Gabriel and looking directly at her. Please, sweetheart, they forced me. Silas threatened me. I had no choice. I didn't think they would actually hurt you. I thought they just wanted Gabriel. You sent them the color of my dress, Dad, Eliza interrupted, the word tasting like poison. You gave them a target. You sold me to Gabriel to save your debt, and then you sold me to Silas to save your pride. Gabriel's finger tightened on the trigger. Give the word, Eliza. He dies right here. The room held its breath. Eliza looked at the man who had raised her, the man who had traded her life for a union contract and a quiet retirement. The old Eliza would have begged for his life. The old Eliza would have forgiven him, but she had died on that terrace in Taormina. No, Eliza said quietly. Gabriel glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You want to let him live? I want him to suffer, Eliza corrected, her eyes locked on her father's pathetic, weeping form. Killing him is too easy. If you kill him, his debt is paid. She turned to Gabriel, the undisputed king of New York's underworld. Strip him. Take the companies, take the bank accounts, take the offshore trusts. Leave him with absolutely nothing. And if he ever sets foot in the state of New York again, your men can put him in the foundation of his own precious Hudson Yards project. Her father let out a wail of despair, realizing that a life of absolute poverty and exile was far worse than a quick bullet. Dominic stepped forward, grabbing Alfred by the collar and dragging him out of the penthouse like a piece of garbage. Gabriel slowly lowered his weapon, clicking the safety back on. He looked at the remaining men at the table. The restructuring is over. The Costa family belongs to me. Clean this up. He turned to her, the bloodlust slowly fading from his eyes, replaced by a profound, heavy respect. They stood in the center of the ruined penthouse, surrounded by death and shattered glass, two survivors bound by a contract of condemnation that had somehow forged them in fire. He reached out, slipping his hand into hers. His grip was firm, anchoring, and fiercely protective. Let's go home, wife, Gabriel murmured. Eliza squeezed his hand back, finally stepping out of the shadow of the girl she used to be and into the terrifying, exhilarating reality of the woman she had become. Lead the way, husband. The transition from a terrified pawn to a mafia queen was not born of romance, but of survival. The honeymoon in Sicily was designed to be her graveyard, orchestrated by a traitorous underboss and a father whose greed vastly outweighed his love. Instead, the gunfire at the San Domenico Palace shattered the fragile, performative boundaries of their business arrangement. Gabriel Costa, The man who bought her to shield his empire became the only man willing to bleed to protect her life. By the time they stood in the Baccarat penthouse, looking down at the ruins of those who sought to destroy them, the contract was null and void. They were no longer playing a role for the commission. They had forged a real, terrifying alliance in blood and betrayal. This marriage is just business was a lie. It had become a war, and together they won.